Hello, my name is Joshua Gilliland, one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. It's 2025. We're here, and we are here to discuss the New Year's Eve episode of Skeleton Crew, not about having friends. And that's one of the key elements of this episode, and it's a ton of fun. With me is retired Judge Matthew Sherino, Chris Butler, known as the Star Wars lawyer on social media, and Stephen Telefield, veteran of many cons with me. How is everyone doing? Going in introduction order. So, Judge Sherino.
I am well. Happy New Year, everybody, and great to see everybody back and healthy and doing well.
Chris.
Hello, what have we here? Happy New Year, everybody. It's great to be back. And what a gift, not only to get Christmas Eve present in Star Wars, but also a New Year's Eve present with more Star Wars.
I want more.
Yeah.
Stephen.
I'm good, thanks. I just celebrated her birthday, so I'm like a year older since the last
Oh.
time you saw me. But I'm doing well otherwise, hanging in there.
Walk it off, buddy. Walk it off. So this was uh, just a fun episode. It's Bryce Dallas Howard, who is turning into one of the best Star Wars directors we have. I would love to see her get a movie to direct at this point, or be showrunner on an entire series. She's got the chops. She knows storytelling, and this was just an extremely well-made episode. And it's packed with legal issues like a treasure chest. So, first up, we have Jod claiming the treasure he found on the spa's property. There's a lot to unpack with. And Stephen, did you by chance fill out this section?
I do, you know me so well. I love a good property issue spotting exam question. Yeah, it struck me as odd as Jod is climbing out of the storm drain with, draped in jewels and gold and saying, "Hey, look at all this gold I found on your property. I guess I'm just gonna take it." And it just struck me as odd that the landowner probably would want to claim that property, but it also turns out that in California, at least, if the found property is valued at more than $100, then the finder is obligated to turn it over to the police. The police then advertise the found property for 90 days, and if no one claims it, then the finder can keep it. But it also kind of matters if the property was lost, or if it was abandoned, like the person gave up the title to it. But if it's lost, like what it seems like Captain Renaud did here, he didn't seem to relinquish his entitlement to the property. He kind of kept it very secure. And in that case, if Jod keeps it, it's a larceny because he's obligated. He can't keep it lawfully unless he makes a reasonable effort to find the true owner and to return it to them. I mean, you can argue about whether Renaud, who's lost in his at-and pursuit, if any reasonable effort would find him in a way that would allow Jod to return it to him. So maybe he can keep it, but he should have, if it was in California, he should have turned it over to the police first.
Well, let me throw a couple things your way into this fact pattern. One, you have to report it to a law enforcement agency. Given that the pleasure yacht cruise area has their own security, are they not the law enforcement that it's been reported to? And I have to imagine that we saw some bodies down there. What if those were previous security people that went down there to try and go down there, and then they were unsuccessful?
Yeah, it's curious. I mean, because we talked a little bit last time about how on a lot of planets and a lot of worlds of Star Wars that the authorities kind of overlap with kind of private security, and a lot of like the spa's officers may very well be law enforcement on that planet. So
Mhm.
yeah, and also the fact that this all of this property is probably itself stolen,
Yeah.
that it's all plunder. So who actually is entitled to get all this? It certainly is something that would have to be processed through the proper channels, I would think. But yeah, good
And
question.
then my second thing would be, if Tech Renaud is still alive, which I still have a theory that he is. and he has not been to back to claim any of this. He has essentially abandoned it
Right.
because
Well, yeah,
his
that's
face
true.
was obscured for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, maybe he did. Maybe he's renounced it. That would be the question that they would have to resolve, I guess. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Or he's been dead for 500 years. I think that's the
True.
other option. So,
Yeah.
and that makes it weird because if it's plunder and stolen from others, are any of those descendants still around?
Right.
Mhm.
It gets very strange
Yeah.
very quickly because
Right.
it's stolen property that a pirate had, and if everyone's very dead, are we going to start doing some weird tracing to figure out who should this go to through inheritance,
Mhm.
intestate succession, or trying to read a will from, centuries earlier? Because
Yeah.
it's an open question about how far back does all this go? Because we have two timelines, or three. You have present day, you have Renaud, and before Renaud, you have when Atten was founded, which I think goes back far back, 500 to 1,000 years to the old Republic time.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
it's not without some precedent to some extent. And you deal, and there's been plenty of cases in New York with art dealing with property that was stolen either by the Nazis in World War II, and certainly
Mhm.
the British are responsible for plundering the nations of the world throughout history, and most of their stuff is in their museums. And you do have ongoing cases where countries are trying to get back what they considered plundered resource country. And in our country too, there's various Native American tribes that are trying to recover what they consider their tribal property from various museums that house uh, those works. So there is some issues dealing with that. And New York has a very similar abandoned property law as does California, where you have to turn it into police. In fact, I wrote a very interesting non-Star Wars decision. The New York police were doing a setup called Operation Lucky Bag, and they would leave a bag in the subway system that an Xbox and some other items, and if you picked up that and walked past the police officer that was at the bottom of the steps, they would then proceed to arrest you for stealing this bag. And I wrote a decision that said that the abandoned property law gives them a certain amount of days to turn in that property to the precinct. And they do not have to turn it over to the cop that was at the bottom of the steps, and that kind of shut down that particular operation. But it was an interesting set of circumstances in New York on that issue.
That's
Yeah,
so
I don't like
interesting.
the sound of that plan. Like but that's a side quest of like that was their
They
plan.
they had two versions of it. One with the bag, which I had issues with, which is why I stopped that movement. They had a where they would have phone sticking out of someone's backpack. If a person took the phone, it was a sting operation, and there was watching it and recording it. And that I found to be okay because clearly, if you're taking the phone from someone else's backpack, it's an intent to take. My wife had the greatest line with the Xbox. She said, "If I found it, there's no way I'm giving it to the cop at the station. It would end up on the cop's Christmas tree. I'm bringing it to the precinct, maybe, so at least there's a record of it being turned in."
Mhm.
Yeah, that it just wow. Well, thank you. So thank you for being a good judge. So uh speaking of that, we have our second trial in Star Wars that's live action, third overall, fourth if you include the deleted scene from Solo. But there's a lot to unpack here. So I'm just going to hit the issues and then let's break them down for each of us to discuss. So we have Captain Brutus giving out a death sentence. That's where we pick up. You know, raises the question, what were the charges? We then are introduced to the concepts of the right to last appeal or final appeal in equal time. Who was the prosecutor and who was the judge, and we have an appellate process that comes into play. There's a lot here from an alien proceeding, because this is very different than how we would have a criminal trial. And it's pirates, and they're talking about the pirate code, which makes it sound like the code of civil procedure or constitution. And there's a lot for us to unpack. So Stephen, you got a smile. I'm going to take a guess that you filled in some notes here on some observations. Please share them.
Having spent some time at the Court of Appeals and in appellate practice, I feel like you're right. This was a trial, but I feel like this might be the first appeal that we saw in Star Wars. Is that right? Because I don't think Ahsoka appealed anything. But yeah, it's so interesting that the first thing that struck me was that there's this idea of equal time, which raises the question of whether the defendant had an opportunity to present their case in defense to the charges during the trial. If the first time they get to talk is during the appeal, that's a totally different system from what we have. In other words, they just get railroaded in their trial, and then when they go to appeal, then they can actually present a defense.
Steven, did you think that there was any chance that, because when we first come in contact with Jod, he's in prison. So
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if possibly he received the trial, before that, and was sentenced and was in the prison awaiting sentencing. And what we caught up with was the sentence now that they caught him.
Oh,
So
maybe, yeah.
I'm not sure if there, if the trial didn't happen before the series started. Maybe, possibly.
That's possible. That's possible. Although the kids met him in jail before they
Correct.
were even
Correct.
trialed or tried. But that's really possible. Actually, he might have just been awaiting sentencing, and that was yeah. That's funny. Interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. So there you go. Also, is when you're on appeal, usually you don't have. But the other thing that I was thinking was that generally you don't re-argue your case from the first instance. He wasn't making any arguments about Brutus applying the law incorrectly or getting a fact wrong. He was just presenting his defense to the jury, I get, to the people that were gathered there, which you would have thought that he would have had an opportunity to do before if he was actually had been tried, but that would be in our system, of course. But then, of course, in most jurisdictions, or not, I don't know most, but many, if there's a death penalty involved, like there are here, here at least here in California, it's a constitutional requirement that is automatically appealed. The California Supreme Court reviews every criminal conviction in which the imposed sentence was death. So it kind of skips the intermediate appellate court and goes right to the Supreme Court, which explains partially why it takes 5+ years for the California Supreme Court to issue an opinion. But all cases that involve the death penalty are automatically appealed, which is different from ordinary other appeals to the California Supreme Court or other courts of last resort, where you have to apply for review and ask the judges or the judicial panel to review your case based on a specific issue. So it was really interesting. I was really excited to see an appeal. I thought it was really fun.
Chris, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm thinking along the same lines as Judge Sharina, that he was awaiting sentencing, and they probably did pile up some more crimes, probably murder, just because of all the crew members that definitely died on that snapback from that fueling line, as well as if anybody that he might have gotten, and then theft of the droid, of the kids, and things of that nature. I think that would have been the piling on for that. But it seems like probably, since I think he was probably already going to be sentenced to death, because in that first episode, one of the things that Brutus says before the mutiny happens was like, all these good men died, for nothing. And so I think he was already going to get the same fate that they got.
There is procedurally just differences the idea of, the right to confront one's accuser, to put on a defense, like that's ingrained in our system. He gets to do that, but there's no right to counsel here.
Mhm.
There's no discovery that takes place as well. He is arguing his case after judgment's been entered, and we don't know the exact timing of this. From how long was he in the brig prior to the kids getting there? Was there already a first trial and this is a second with new things piled on? Where was the first one, we're just going to leave you to rot in the brig for till you die? So again, some unknowns. The other thing that Stephen raised with, the mandatory appeal in California, Governor Newsom very early on put a moratorium on all death penalties. So like we're not executing anyone anymore. I don't know if any prosecutors are seeking the death penalty, knowing that there's a moratorium that theoretically could change with a new governor who would lift the moratorium. But when the moratorium was entered, there was footage of all the equipment being carried out of San Quentin for executing people. So like they disassembled it. So there's from California politics and criminal procedure, that's just interesting because we might not bring it back. Like is my reaction to that. But again, I think a fuller trial than we have seen in live action, because Andor was very Soviet style.
Mhm.
And this, he actually got to argue his case, or at least full on jury nullification.
Yeah, with a shanty, no less.
I mean, see nothing wrong with that. I mean,
Not at all.
I wouldn't do that in court, but
The famous
That-
shanty
That was
defense.
the appropriate. That was a true jury of one's peers. They were fellow pirates, and if you look historically at the way a lot of pirate ships ran, it was a majority rule by the crew to pick their captain. It was a majority rule with regards to discipline of fellow sailors and fellow pirates on a lot of. So I think that's where they're getting a lot of this from. Uh, on the New York realm, with regards to the death penalty, our state declared it unconstitutional in 2004, the year before I took the bench, so I never had to worry about any death penalty cases. And the governor soon thereafter did also have all the equipment taken out of uh, the the um, the prisons as well, and it was declared unconstitutional for a very interesting reason. There was what we call an Allen charge in New York, which is when a jury is deadlocked, there is charge that is given to the jury, and the charge that was to be given to the jury was actually within the death penalty statute itself. And our court of appeals, which is our highest court, found that the that charge was unconstitutional because it kind of almost forced them to consider the death penalty, because it said in order to have the death penalty, your verdict must be unanimous. Where in reality, if they were continued their deadlock, that was akin to giving life without parole. So because it left out that particular or, it declared unconstitutional, and the legislature never corrected it, so the death penalty as of 2004 was dead in New York unless it would ever be resurrected in a new statute, which I don't think is something that's possible in this blue state as New York.
it's death is permanent. So like if the Innocence Project comes along and they realize we have the wrong person,
It's too late once you've done.
Mhm.
yeah, and so it's to avoid the sum of all fears that an innocent person's executed. So yeah, I'm on board with not doing that from a policy
And
perspective.
like California, you as a defendant have a right to appeal directly to our Court of Appeals, which was the highest court, but you could choose to appeal to the intermediary court
Hmm,
and then go to the higher court. But it was up to you as the defendant or the defendant's counsel to make that decision.
interesting. Were there strategic considerations for doing that, making one choice or the other?
Uh, from some of the appeals that happened, there were certain departments that were in high regard, and you
Hmm,
might want to see how they handled it before you still then had the right to appeal it again. So it was basically gave you two bites.
right.
But it would take longer. So
Sure.
that was I think the area there.
Hmm.
Fascinating. Well, let's raise the issue of the ADA and whether or not KB's AUGs, or I don't know if they've actually been called augments fully, would be covered by the ADA. And Stephen, did you take lead on adding all of these notes to the outline?
I mean, this episode, my first job out of law school was working at a disability rights organization, and then the second job was working at the Ninth Circuit. So this is these issues just kind of resonated
This
with
was a
me.
good episode for you.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I mean, the ADA defines disability as the physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And then there's a couple of other definitions about the history of such an impairment or whether someone is perceived as having such an impairment. But the key ideas are the impairment substantially limits and life activities, major life activities. I gather from KB's reference to her accident that whatever happened to her was really severe, and she might not have survived without the cybernetic enhancements to her neck and head. And so, of course, if she has some sort of injury or disability that would um, you know, cause her death, that certainly substantially limits major life activities like breathing, and also the fact that she seems to go into sort of a immobilized state when she is running low on power, or there's some damage to her equipment. There's some sort of mobility issues there as well. So I think any way you slice it, she's covered by the ADA. But there was litigation in the early years of the ADA about whether mitigating measures like um, you know uh, um, glasses or artificial limbs actually negate your disability status, and the regulations were amended to make it clear that you determine substantial limitation without regard to any mitigating measures. So even though she has cybernetic implants that make her senses maybe as good as or even better than what they would have been if they were not enhanced, she still has a substantial limitation to her major life activities. The exception to that is just regular eyeglasses, because the Congress didn't, or the regulatory agency didn't think it was necessary to call everyone who wears glasses as being covered by the ADA if the ordinary glasses kind of sufficiently correct your vision. And she does wear kind of that protective eyewear, but it looks like she can see without it. It looks like maybe it's just enhances her perception in some way. But yeah, so yeah, I would think she was definitely covered by the ADA. We fortunately didn't see any sort of situations where she was being discriminated against based on her disability. But if she was treated differently in some way, either in public accommodation or in her education, because of her injuries and because of the tools she uses to compensate for them, she would certainly be covered by the law.
Judge
In fact,
Shrina,
just the opposite. I think, she was kind of embarrassed by her augmentation to the extent that she didn't want anyone else in their group to know that she had any limitation whatsoever. So
Right.
yeah, so we clearly didn't have, the situation of her trying to get into a restaurant and couldn't because of the her disability. But I think she was really very, doesn't want any special treatment. So she might decline any of the protections of the ADA.
Right, which is so common for people with disabilities, especially those that have sort of very visible disabilities, that they don't want people to focus on the differences. They want people to focus on what they can do and how they can participate and how they can contribute. So I thought that was a very authentic writing of that character, that she was so concerned about people, the way that people were perceiving her, and wanted to make sure that everyone was treating her the same. And on the flip side, I think that that it was a very thoughtful portrayal of Fern's character too, who was like, who wanted her friend to know that she loved her no matter what, like her differences didn't make a difference to her. But that can be such an interesting dynamic between a person who is disabled and the people who love them, and navigating that is always can be kind of a challenge. And I thought it was portrayed very thoughtfully and very lovingly. It was great.
I agree. I think the way they handled the disability, it really was a hallmark moment, I think, in a Star Wars kiddie show that really dealt with some serious issues in a
Mhm.
very, very thoughtful manner. I mean, yeah, again, I've been in the give Dallas, a movie in the Star Wars universe for a very, very long time, and every episode that she has been a part of has these kind of moments, and it was really good. Whoever they had, I'm sure there were experts and consultants that were brought on with the particular episode, and they really, really did a great job.
I, I think for KB, she can't be near water or steam.
Mhm.
That will cause her problems because of her augments, which are necessary to live. And I think that raises some interesting questions about reasonable accommodations of you can't put her in a situation that's going to cause harm, and being aware of she can't do that because she'll freeze up, thus can't climb up the ladder that's 20 stories tall, because she will not have the mobility to do so as her system shuts down. So it's, I mean, again, coming in contact with water is something human beings do normally on a daily basis. Uh, so there's some, questions there of like that's a normal life function that she is greatly challenged to do. Uh, Chris, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think they did a beautiful job showcasing a person with disabilities, because especially with this augmentation, we've only seen Lobot and Echo, and with Echo, the Bad Batch, they were all sort of defective, and it was done to Echo at the behest of the CIS, and with Lobot it was done by the Empire, and that was sort of lobotomized him. That's where he got his name from. So I think in this situation where the parents kind of made it clearer earlier on that this was done to save her life, which goes to one of the requirements under the ADA, that there's a record of it. So if, the parents were just like, she needs her medicine or she needs her maintenance or whatever, that's clearly like something that happens on a schedule. So there's that record there, that would cover it under the law. And I think, the way that she's able to explain it and express it to Wim shows that this is something that has, like, she knows how to save her life, even if she can't do it herself.
Yeah, Josh, I think you raised a good point about the steam from the spa as being kind of potentially dangerous to her. And because the spa is presumably a public accommodation, it's covered by Title III. And it's interesting because obviously public accommodations can't do things that screen out people with disabilities from participating in the activities, but there's an exception in the regs that says that a public accommodation shall not impose or apply eligibility criteria that screen out or tend to screen an individual with disability from fully enjoying the services or facilities unless the criteria can be shown to be necessary for the provision of the goods. So I guess the argument of the spa would be the whole point of these mud spas is that they're hot and they're steamy. There's no modification that we can make to our services that would be reasonable, that would accommodate a person with her specific disability. So that would be their argument, that that having the steam as their is their service, and forcing them to not have the steam is not reasonable under the regs.
Yeah, it shuts down the spa.
Right.
Because like
Yeah.
that's the purpose of the spa. It'd be
Yeah.
drain the pool. It's like, okay, now no one can go swimming.
Right.
It's again problems with that. And how does she again like shower? Like, there has to be a way for her to protect herself. And like how does that work?
Yeah. Her
Because
hair is so pretty. It's so cool. She's got to have really clean hair.
and again, this raises the question about Ad-Atten. It's not the technology seems to match what's currently in the New Republic. It's like we haven't seen a divergence. So it'd be like, here's the colony of cowboys who have stagnated for 200 years and they still look the same. Or it still looks like the Roman Empire, like nothing has changed, and the other society has airplanes. Like we don't have that. That raises the bigger question of, is the entire galaxy stagnant, that they hit a technology plateau and then just stopped? And because we don't see a divergence, everything looks similar. Like it'd be, again, if the ships look the same, but we have the droid pilots from Star Tours that, okay, have these been around for 1,000 years? Like how long have these been in circulation? How does it still work? Like, so again, there are some questions there that I don't think we'll get the answers to, other than they have a really good maintenance program, and they're self-sufficient somehow. Which raises us to the very Spielberg moments of the kids split up, and because they have different ideas on how to solve their problem. And my question for all of you is, if the children had a partnership, meaning that there's a duty of loyalty to everybody, should they have split up or should they have stayed together? Or was splitting up the Scooby-Doo answer to solving the different problems? And is there a volunteer to take this one on?
I think for me, when it comes to the duty of loyalty, and I think none of they're splitting up because they have two conflicting ideas, but neither idea is expressly harmful to the partnership itself. So I think in that way they're okay. And especially since I think when Fern and Neil left, they're like, we'll bring the ship down, right? So I think they're definitely not working in the interest. And then, Wim and KB are just looking for an alternative to get to the ship. So I think they're working the same goal, just different ways. So I think in that way, I don't think any of the fiduciary duties are broken or breached.
Well said. Judge Sharino?
Yeah, and I think the splitting up towards the common goal is tried and true Star Warsism. In every novel and in every one of the movies, there's always that breaking off into usually three sub-stories and then the coming back together. Like Chris said, their goal was always the same. None was running counter to the partnership goal of getting back to Ad-Aden. It was just different ways to get there, and whoever was going to get there first would then pick up the rest of the crew.
Well said. Well said. So pivoting to the next issue with that is KB needs a new circuit breaker effectively made. And, this is Wim's hero moment of, did Wim have a duty to treat or a duty to rescue KB? And somebody put a verse in here between the next one. So I'm going to take a guess that was Stephen. And why don't you take it away, sir?
Yeah, I guess those struck me as really contrasting situations, because Wim didn't cause KB's circuitry to fail. And so generally there's no legal obligation for anyone to help someone who's in trouble. It's something that people always find really kind of surprising about the law, is that if you come across someone who's in in trouble or needs help, you don't have to help them. And there's some limitations on the fringes of that, but generally there's no duty to rescue. So he didn't really technically have an obligation unless there was some sort of special relationship, like there was a parent or there was a common carrier or something like that. And I'm not sure, maybe the group has thoughts on whether there was a special relationship. One kid to another, I don't think is generally.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's maybe a moral obligation at
Yeah.
most. And then there's the next layer of that problem, and the reason that most of us give to why there's no special duty. If Wim starts to try to fix and he makes it worse, is he then liable for making it worse? And generally you would be, unless, like many states have, there's a Good Samaritan law, which
Mhm.
protects someone and instead of regular negligence, there has to either be a super negligence or recklessness in order to be liable for helping. Because all, all good deeds, and sometimes, you might think you're doing the best to help a situation, and you absolutely make it 100 times worse. So that's why there's that no special duty. So, but I agree with you as between Wim and KB, that I don't think there was any special duty other than that friendship, and he clearly didn't want his friend to seize up.
Yeah, I think the only one of the four that has a special duty to the rest is Fern, since she took on the mantle as captain. I think that adds a layer of, responsibility because the captain owes duties to the crew. However, she's still a child.
And
Um,
Jod's now the captain.
oh yeah, he is the captain now. That's true.
After they're challenged.
Now, but if he leaves and he abandons the ship, does Fern have the ability to become captain again? Because, Jod was captured and taken away. Or do they have a duty to go rescue him since he's their captain?
So I want to answer all of that. And each one has a bunch of subparts. So for Wim to KB, the only way that there could be a special relationship is there like some partnership that they're on this joint venture together. But I don't know if that's enough. I think this goes to Wim realizing that not all hero adventures are the with the lightsaber and doing some heroic act. It's he saw someone in need. He did something uncomfortable he didn't fully understand. He made it work, and he saved her. And like that scene with her, saying like, calling him good work, Jedi, or something along that, super adorable. Again, the 1980s good vibes from this, just like huggable, like just best of Star Wars and that nostalgia feeling of people working together and just truly very sweet. Going to Fern as the captain, and whether or not she still is, because she did lose, she yielded, but then Jod's immediately captured. And so he wasn't a good captain because he didn't get very far and he never actually assumed command of the ship. So if we're going from she's still in command because she's got the Onyx Cinder and they're out there doing their thing and they're acting like a crew. There might be some loophole that Smee might act upon, that they're the ones in operational control of the vessel. And Jod really fumbled the ball here because you actually need a crew and he's not leading anybody. So that's you know, my thoughts. Now let's pivot back to Fern. Did Fern have a duty of loyalty to help Neil, to help haul him up the ladder? Because he's not tall enough. So again, I would have done a French bowline as opposed to just the knot around the shoulders, but that's me. Uh, Working in the sailor side of things. And does she have a duty to him? And Chris, you just touched on it. You sounds like a yes. Uh, Stephen, you're nodding. What's your thoughts?
Well, it's also the case that when you create the dangerous situation, then you
Mm.
have an obligation to help people that you've endangered. And so
Mhm.
Fern was the one that had the bright idea to climb up the side of a cliff. And Neil, as it turns out, was not um, really capable of doing that and was in very serious danger. He was in a very precarious situation because of her conduct. Although I guess you could argue like he didn't have to follow along with her and it was his choice to do it. But I mean, I think that if she and I think she rightly sort of acknowledged that she has a responsibility to try to figure out how to make it work now that he came along and she figured out that sort of rope thing. But if he was injured because of her conduct, then she would be liable for the negligence of putting him in a dangerous situation. So she would have an interest in making sure that he stayed safe so that she wasn't liable for any injuries.
Yeah, and I think in furtherance of that, Neil only went with her so she wouldn't go by herself. So he's acting in furtherance of the partnership and accomplishing the goal. So I think there is, that fiduciary duty of care to make sure that, like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I can't be working in adverse to what's going on with my partners or the partnership at all, because the partnership is ultimately harmed if Neil gets hurt or God forbid dies.
Yeah, they won't go there, but yes, that is a dark,
My
ugly
sweet
lie.
boy,
Yeah.
Protect Neil at all
at
costs.
all costs.
The merchandising. Chirino, any thoughts?
Other than I agree that Neil needs to be protected at all costs so that I can get his 3.75-inch figure when it finally comes out and not this 9-inch one that they stuck with in the stores because they take up too much space.
Yeah, that is a big, big action figure. So, or is that a plush?
The plush I might succumb to. I have a guest room with, various kid plushes.
Okay, good to know for if we ever visit, but good to know. So let's talk about the trash crabs, which God bless Phil Tippett. So Wim goes along with them because our boy does not have the best judgment in reading people. Uh, Bless his heart. But they entice and fraudulently entrap women KB to be food because they're just saying things like, friend or follow or home.
And they only say those things after he says them first. So they're really just parroting what was fed to him. And I also am hopeful that these trash crabs end up somewhere in Merchandiseville as well, because I have a pretty good droid collection as well. And I can see one of those trash crabs sitting on top of my Roomba maybe.
Yeah, given how they have like BD1 that can walk, I presume that they'll have one of these in the near future that we'll be able to get at Galaxy's Edge. But dare I dream. So yeah, I don't know how much misrepresentation's taking place because they're not like saying, follow us and we'll take you home. Like there isn't that. It's the parroting. And if anything, they're being, shuffled off to.
Yeah, it's parroting and wishful thinking on Wim's part. So I don't think there was any intentional misrepresentation that they were bringing them to any great place, um, other than the giant mother crab.
Yeah, and I mean, do they have the mental capacity to, know that they're what they're doing, because they're like, okay, we're going home, and then, like, I guess they're coming too, or, do they even know that, or is it just one-minded home, home? Then they hear a new word, they're like, follow, follow, follow.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a lot of cyanter. Stephen, any comments to add?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wonder if you could spin an argument that like the main crab uses them to like lure people to the crab, and so there's some sort of ruse or fraudulent scheme going on, but that didn't really seem like there they had any means to lure anyone anywhere other than just kind of being weird looking. So yeah, I don't think that there is probably any intentional misrepresentation, but funny situation.
Yeah, this is Wim making a bad life decision. But if he hadn't made that bad life decision, KB would have been, experienced a total system shutdown. So he got to work on judgment, and they all need to work on communicating of, I need to do this first. So
On a related, although somewhat tangential manner, the mother crab was a practical effect and not CGI. And when I read that, I really, it's really something the way, there's something to be said for the practical effects they're done right, and that was clearly done really well.
uh, oh yeah, Phil Tippett stop motion. Like
Yeah.
it's like, I did the AT-ATs, watch me. And here we go. And it was really well done. And from what I've heard from other podcasts, there were other props and Star Wars Easter eggs on the shell of the crab, like a chunk of the Millennium Falcon, chunk from like R2D2 or C3PO. I haven't seen it, but that's what I heard earlier today. And it's like, cool. I'm like, that's the very cool. Uh, so did the Skull Ridge Spa have a right to have the onyx cinder scrapped? Anyone want to take on this bad boy?
Yeah, yes, but I wonder because usually if yeah, as a private property owner, if there is a vehicle on your property and it's not there, some different jurisdictions have time limits, and sometimes it's just like, I don't want it here. It can be towed to at least here in Michigan, in a local towing company, and then if the it's decreed that it's abandoned, then it can be scrapped. Now, if they're the towing company and they have a scrapyard, and they said they're a neutral planet, so they seem to, have their own, they're all the police force. So if their police force says, hey, this is an abandoned vehicle, we're taking it into custody, then they can scrap it.
Do they?
It seemed like very fast scrapping because
Yeah.
Yeah.
like you said, the towing tow yard at that point there's some due process where they, there's a list in the newspapers that if you haven't claimed your property by this date, then it's going to be deemed abandoned and it's going to be scrapped. So this is the same day, maybe at most the next day, and they're already throwing it into the scrap yard. So I don't think there's any due process. So I have a bit of a problem with just the speed of that. Now, granted, if there was some kind of sign where they parked or landed the spaceship that said, if you do not pay the taxes, the fees, the whatever within 48 hours, 24 hours, we have the right to scrap it, then I would agree with that. But absent that, I think there has to be some reasonableness, and I don't think like the same day throwing it in the scrapyard was reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. The only other thing I can think of is that, the Onyx Cinder, because it's an old ship and it's always, looking like it's about to fall apart when it takes off or it lands, that maybe it's a hazard to the public, and that's why they got to get rid of it.
Or scaring away the rich spa customers from,
That too.
they're like, what is that piece of junk that's over there? But even then, I would think they could store it somewhere, not give it to the crab. It seemed like a pretty sizable planet and had non-crab areas, so they could have put it somewhere else for a week or two to let the owners maybe get. Although, did they take the situation that we know the owner was a criminal and he's
Mhm.
already been taken into custody, and therefore, by the captain of the ship abandoning his ship, even though he did not abandon it voluntarily, we need to get rid of it. And maybe that was what the viewpoint that they saw it as.
But forfeiture that fast is a bit rushed. I agree with, like, it goes to the impound and there's the opportunity to get it back the same day the same hour scrapping seems a bit excessive. But it does have some wonderful storytelling with Wim manning the turret saying it's too invincible. Just the thing a 10-year-old would say. Just very well done. So, which brings me to the observation I had. So I've talked about how I volunteer in Sea Scouts. While we don't have death on the line with giant crab disposal units, the way that the youth all worked together as a team, from the bridge to the engine room to the gun, is similar to seeing how Sea Scouts operate, minus we don't do firearms for shooting at giant claw destructive. We don't put the kids in that situation.
That seems like a negative
that
for
might
me.
increase your enrollment if you add
I mean, there would be adults with like, can you tell me more about the space monster? Like there's elements there that would be good selling points. But the way the youth all acted as a team in order to maneuver the ship, because no one could do it by themselves. Like KB turns into the navigator and the engineer. And then you have, Fern and Neil operating the vessel. And you have Wim taking the initiative of, I'm going to try to shoot the teeth so we can try to escape. It just reminded me of scouting, because we teach youth to work together as a team. And while we don't have those type of situations because that's not how we roll, it was cool to see that. It was like, okay, I've seen kids do similar things with line handling and plotting courses and navigating and learning how to throw a heaving line. And so it's like, I thought that was cool. And it's like, I've seen that response. I thought that was endearing.
and I saw it as the brilliance of Disney, and that this was an ode to Smuggler's Run, which I'm sure we've all written at this point. And when you and I'll go one better, my daughter was even crew for Smuggler's Run when the pandemic was over and her hotel hadn't opened yet, repurposed, and she got to be part of the crew in Batu. But when you go on that ride, you get a card. You're going to be a pilot, you're going to be an engineer, you're going to be a gunner, you're going to be a navigator. And I really saw this as literally giving those roles out to the kids to the Smuggler's Run ride.
Yeah, it's
I
all across
say,
marketing.
It
yeah,
is.
I
Disney
say
is
give it
faster.
2-3 years. Because we're getting Din and Grogu in the what's it called? Razor Crest
Yes.
added to Smuggler's Run. So give it a couple years, we'll have Skeleton Crew. Because I think this is going to be a bigger hit than most people expected, which I'm all for.
And now I have to buy an Onyx Cinder and Onyx Cinder 2.0 for my collection
That's
when they add those to the Micro Galaxy line.
That's exactly what I said to my friend. I was like, now Disney gets to sell 2 for 1. And my friend was just like, the George Lucas way.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Money will find a way. Always does. I want that piece of plastic hanging on the shelf. Let's do this. Yeah, the storytelling from the whole decoupler, and I know I'm not saying the right term that Smee said it in episode 2, to the Renard making the comment about the hull's been clad in armor, so we knew it had armor on it. The issue is how much, and apparently a lot. Like that was encased in armor. Okay, that's not how a ship normally gets, but it's like covering a tugboat with tires on the outside for being able to push up against a pier or a ship, so that way it's not the hull taking the direct hit. It's similar, that it's protecting the hull, and that ship looks very sleek without all the armor plating on her.
That was like a yell out loud moment. I was so excited. I love a transformation moment, and that was so cool. It reminded me of the Phoenix from Battle of the Planets.
Yes.
Kind of like that sort of shape with like the wings way at the back.
Let's see. Can we see the Phoenix?
You
have
have a
one?
Phoenix?
I have
Really?
a Phoenix. Hang on, I'll get a Phoenix.
Yes, please.
That's awesome. I I mean, going down that path, I've been watching Star Blazers 2205 on Crunchyroll, and just started 3199. But the subtitles on episode 3, I think, switched to Spanish. And
Okay, I'm back.
stalling for to
And here's the
see,
Phoenix.
golly,
Talk
up a
about a
little.
reveal. That's amazing.
Wow,
It's
beautiful.
it's a similar shape, right? It's got kind of
Hmm.
like the wings at the back and kind of that blunt nose. I guess the Phoenix has sort of a pointy nose when the
Yeah.
car
Yeah, well, the
is
car goes up front. It
right.
fell out on my way here, and
Oh
Hmm.
no.
the and
No,
then the
Jason. Oh my God.
and yeah, I'll get them. I also have all five of the Phoenix, the Battle of the Planets, and Star Blazers were my two favorite cartoons as a young kid, and the Yamato's back there as well. I have one shelf that's on Star Wars that has all of my favorites. So a couple of to Josh's credit, a couple of Star Trek ships are there. I got Picard's new ship there, and this reminded me of the um, I guess it was the next generation when the saucer part took off. Because that was like so unique and and so yeah, but I hadn't thought of the Phoenix until you said that, Stephen.
It reminded me of two different franchises. The first with pushing the red button or don't ever push that button, Men in Black, the first Men
Oh,
in Black, and then the second one is The Dark Knight when the Bat Pod shoots out of the tumbler. Those were the two, and I was just thinking the whole time, I'm like, push the button.
Yeah, we knew it was going to be pushed at some point in the
Chekhov's
season.
button.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great moment, and Onyx Ender 2.0 is gorgeous.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's also to go like interesting to know that the armor included additional engines
Hmm.
that were on the bow of the ship. And so now it's okay, so it doesn't have the booster engines, but it has the quad four, I think at least four, on the aft side.
And it's a lot less of a weight it's carrying too.
Yes, yes, which would I think matter more in atmosphere.
Right,
Uh,
not as much in hyperspace.
yeah, but again, it's a pretty ship. And in Wim's comment about claims he's on the new ship was again
Hmm.
chef's kiss to episode 1, which again just highlights this is fun storytelling. Like
Hmm.
they're just doing a really nice job of telling this fun story. And okay, gotcha. It's great at radio, but again, the Battle of the Planet Phoenix of what how it can come apart and come together. So but again, as we have that 1970s through 80s, and it's also interesting that Judge Trino and I are definitely Star Blazers fans. There are okay, Stephen too. Okay, good because Chris, are you in that camp yet, or
I know it.
okay?
I know it.
I would go 2199 as the entry point. The original from 1974 was written by some people who were upset they lost World War II. Um, the 2199 is, I think, one of the best reboots of a series ever because it has really good storytelling and a solid message. And 2202 gets a little long and goes all over the place, but there's some very dynamic characters. 2205, I think, was the perfect length. And I'll have reserved judgment for 3199 until that's completed. Uh,
I haven't seen any of the new ones. I'm just an old scoop jurist.
I just want the
they're
bird cape. That's all I want. Like,
uh, Crunchyroll has them,
Mm-hmm.
and they're surprisingly good with it. But again, when we cross into doing coverage of those episodes, it's who doesn't want to see a space battleship blowing things up? It's why we love Star Wars. It's like, whoa, tell me more. Fire that bad boy up and let's go for a spin. So it's a lot of fun. So, any other thoughts on this wonderful episode?
Uh,
Anyone?
I think does the spa have any liability towards the for what the pirates did? You know, their patrons that may have been put in harm's way, the kids that were put in harm's way. You know, like you have your own private security, but you know, did you take the proper steps?
And they were guests because they accepted payment. They gave
Hmm.
them a room. So if most hotels do have a special duty to protect their guests. So yeah, I think there could be some liability on behalf of the spa.
Good observation. I also
Yeah.
wondered. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go for, I was just saying I agree.
Yeah, I was just wondering, were there any pirates that were actually dissolved in the acid? I sort of thought they all were, but apparently not.
Uh, at least a couple, because there
Yeah,
were
Hmm.
there were the screens.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
Just the ones that were wearing red shirts.
Yeah.
I knew it wasn't Space Urkel because I was like, they wouldn't kill him off screen.
No.
Very
Gun-
relieved.
Gunter's going to be around for if they get rid of Gunter, it's going to be done in an epic fashion.
Yeah, it's you don't have anyone with that kind of pop culture cred appear, say a couple things, and then get bumped off screen. Like that just no, he's here, let him be. Let's see his arc. I
I hope I hear him say "Gotta go fast" because he was Sonic for a few years.
oh, that's wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, 93 to 95, I think.
I so he's worked consistently. That's a good thing. Like cool. I'll just highlight with the X-Wings taking on pirates. That is the type of thing that the Coast Guard or the Navy would do. There is a precedent for fighting pirates, and Lord knows who contacted the X-Wings. But the military taking on pirates is the thing that the military is known to do, or law enforcement. And this is again the role of what is the New Republic Navy doing? Is it more like a Navy or more like a Coast Guard because they're doing a little law enforcement? Or taking on pirates is the thing that warships generally have done historically. So,
And arguably, it could show that this planet is part of the New Republic in that, that many X-Wings kind of came to the aid of the planet when they called. As we know from the other shows, it's not that easy to get the New Republic to send its military to help,
But they have money.
but they have money.
money finds a way because it's somebody in the banking clan hitting a panic
Well,
button.
and that's true. And
Mhm.
the fact that the banking clan was having their outing there,
Mhm.
if someone from like the banking syndicate made the call to the New Republic, then I'm sure some senator there that had a understanding with the banking people would have had the ship sent. Yeah, no, that's a great point, Chris. As usual, the privileged get the benefits.
Yeah, as opposed to, well, we have to figure out if we're going to go help Navarro or, whatever, or the Mandalorians. We'll have to think about this.
And that's why the First Order had to come to save the day.
Oh,
Now I am surprised about the Mandalorians, even though they're neutral. Like that's a culture of warriors. You know, you want to have like a supply of weapons, but the New Republic was heavily demilitarized, and that's a conversation for another day. But
And a great conversation that will be.
indubitably did. So, everyone, thanks for tuning in wherever you are. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky. Take care now.